Hi everyone, how are you all feeling? Um, do you remember the last proper lesson that we had? I took you through a PowerPoint um, about stereotypes and we went through how to do a section C response. Those of you that weren't there in the lesson, I sent you the PowerPoint, and today's going to be a little bit about just reviewing what we had said in that last lesson, and also thinking about this next title. Imagine you get this question. In comedic literature, opposites are set up but always reconciled. So we're going to have a look at that today. So these were the basic points that I went through in that last lesson, and I'm just going to go through this again for the benefit of those of you that weren't in the lesson. But basically, in the exam, you always get a choice of two questions. So that's nice, isn't it? And the focus is always on an aspect of comedy rather than anything that is specifically related to the text. And for obvious reasons, because you've got to write about two texts in the same essay. And of course, those two texts that you need to write about are Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest, and you need to choose ideally two poems. And the question never asks you to directly compare these texts, which is something quite tricky that you had to do at GCSE, wasn't it? But in fact, these two texts really, you treat them almost as two mini essays tagged together as one big essay. And you shouldn't find this too taxing, because we've already been writing mini essays on various aspects of comedy regarding the poetry and our play Importance of Being Earnest. So that should be quite straightforward. It's a lot easier than trying to grapple with comparing them. And the most important thing that you need to do for Ernest is choose a moment or characters carefully that fit the question. So if you choose a particular scene in the play, it might be the marriage interview, it might be Algernon and Jack scoffing muffins, it might be Gwendolen and Cecily's fight, it might be the ending, and so on. But the important thing that you need to do is you need to get into the detail quite quickly. So depending on the question, you either choose a moment or you choose some characters to write about. And the only thing that you have to do with your introduction is to incorporate the two texts together with a clear thesis. So you write an overarching introduction in relation to the question based on the two texts, and we discussed how you need to keep it quite short and succinct. So ideally no more than two sentences. Try really hard to keep it to no more than two sentences. Otherwise, you're wasting time and you need to crack on, because you've only got you've got 50 minutes for this section C, and you've got the poems and you've got Ernest. So it's kind of like 25 minutes each per text. So there's not very much time, is there? So if you waste too much time on your introduction, then it means you're taking away time from being able to make a really good point. So aim for between 2 to 3 paragraphs on Wilde and 2 to 3 paragraphs on poetry. And this is something that you've been used to doing in your share and repairs, which it's no coincidence that we gave you 20 minutes or 25 minutes to write in your share and repairs on either the poems or Importance of Being Earnest. And a conclusion, by the way, is not necessary. And that is because if you are a smart student, you will have been clarifying your point in relation to the question all the way through. So you don't need a conclusion. A conclusion will just end up repeating a point that you've already made, and examiners don't like that. they write an R in the margin when they see anything repeating an earlier point, and they don't like it, and quite often they take off marks for that. So we don't want to be doing that. So those are some basics that I went through in our last proper lesson. So hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, there are some questions that you can ask me in our time slot on Teams, which for us is Friday. So let's imagine you're going to plan this essay question. And always, 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 whether it is a protest question or whether it's a comedy question for section C, you always think, okay, what is it they want me to talk about? What is the content that they want me to write in this essay? And then what is the debate? What do they want me to debate? So for this question, opposites are set up but always reconciled. Obviously, they want you to talk about opposites that are set up. That's really obvious. And the debate is, are they always reconciled? What does reconciled mean? Well, it means, are they always resolved? So that's something. Are they always resolved, or maybe they're resolved in the poems, but not in earnest? Or maybe they're only partially resolved, and so on. So that is the debate, whether they're reconciled or not. Are they always reconciled? And they like to use these words like always to allow you to debate the question. And those of you that are heading for the top band, you want to try and think of a complexity in that debate, some nuances in the debate to try and impress the examiner. So, in relation to importance of being earnest, when you're planning out your response, you're going to spend a few minutes thinking about, okay, what characters am I going to write about, or what opposites can I choose? What are the best opposites to discuss? And so you go through this sort of process of elimination, asking yourself some questions and thinking about this carefully, so that in the 20 minutes that you have, you're going to show off just how much you know and understand about this text. So you have to choose your topic or your opposites wisely. So are there any characters that are opposites? Well, perhaps there are. You might want to talk about Cecily and Gwendolyn. There are some kind of fundamental differences to these characters, and you can talk about the stereotypes, can't you? The ingenue, the new woman. Are these differences important, though? Maybe not. Or, ultimately, I think as we get towards the ending of the play, we see that there's not really much difference between Cecily and Gwendolyn. In fact, the characters are almost indistinguishable and interchangeable. Do you remember how, when we looked at this in Act 3, how they start to kind of repeat each other's lines, and at one point they even say them at the same time. So there's quite a lot of parallelism going on. We discussed that. And then you might want to kind of move on to thinking about, well, why is it that Wilde made these characters so similar? What's his excuse me, what's his wider meaning here with this rather similar characterization? And Wilde, if you notice, Wilde does use quite a lot of patterning and symmetry and balance in the play. And these characters, we talked about this, how they're not naturalistic, they're not realistic. Wilde isn't expecting us to see these as real people. They belong to a world on stage. They're sort of lacking in uniqueness and any individuality there. There's a lack of authenticity, perhaps, is the point that he's making. So, that might be a good thing to discuss, the Cecily and Gwendolyn thing. You could spend a nice 20 minutes on that. Or perhaps you could think about the opposite setup between the younger and the older generation. we've got Lady Bracknell with a very traditional Victorian elite attitudes. And then we've got Gwendolyn representing a kind of a different way of looking at things, the new woman to a certain extent. So you could maybe choose that in your 20 minutes to write about. Or perhaps we've already talked about the town and country convention. These sort of seem to be opposites on the surface, but actually there's very little difference. And we have also talked about this. And that might be a good one, because I think the important thing is that you need to try and find something that is not a simple yes or no answer, that allows you to come up with a nuanced thesis, a nuanced response. So which opposites would you choose in those 20 minutes? Of course, you can't write about all three of those. You wouldn't have time. You choose the best one. And let's just imagine that you've chosen to write about the town and the country. So this would be my 20 minutes worth of response. I might start off by saying that this was conventionally a sort of opposite in dramatic comedy of the era. And there's plenty online in sort of Sparks notes and kind of Wikipedia and things to sort of take you through that as well. And we've also discussed it in class, haven't we? And then maybe you can start by talking about there are some superficial differences in the play, and have a look at those. And then you could move on to explore how both these settings are essentially places where, bad behaviour happens anyway. Whether it's in the town and the country, people are behaving badly. People are leading double lives, and so on. People are pretending to be someone they're not, and so on. So that might be your sort of general line of argument. And then you might explore what Wilde is implying by this. That then is your 20 minutes on importance of being earnest, and then you're going to move on to then talk about the poetry. And we've got quite a few poems that we could talk about in terms of opposites. Not my best side, I would choose maybe the girl and the knight. They are set up as opposites, aren't they? Or you might talk about the elegy. You might talk about the generals versus the soldiers, and how there seems to be a kind of, this inequality there that Swift is exploring. So you need to choose two. And remember, we talked about maybe choosing one to major in and the other one to minor in, so that you might spend kind of 15 minutes on one and 5 minutes on the other, and so on. You need to cover two poems, but you might cover one in slightly more detail than the other. It tends to work better if you do it that way, because it allows you to get into the detail and not just make superficial points. 10 minutes on one poem, 10 minutes on the other poem. You can end up just by making generalizations, can't you? And another poem that you might talk about is The Rivals. The mother-in-law and the speaker, you could say, have kind of opposing values. That thesis might work. You might talk about Sunny Prestatyn. You might talk about the girl and the vandal, perhaps, as being set up as opposites. But all the time, you need to strike the balance between detailed analysis of the poem and then stepping back and thinking, okay, what is it that the poet is trying to convey here? So it's a combination of detail on methods and then what is the wider meaning. Okay. Moving on to, so you knew this was coming, didn't you? So your task this week is to write a response, and so that's your project for this week. And you're going to type it, and you're going to email it to me anytime between now and Monday the 30th of April, which is your deadline. So I'm going to start marking them next week, and then I'll set something else up as well. So we'll do a little bit more on section C next week, and then we're going to move towards talking about the coursework and thinking about doing some reading for the coursework. And this is exactly what I would have been doing in the classroom this week. So just, feel happy and, secure that you are not missing out on anything and that you can do this perfectly well on your own. And I will mark it and get it back to you and give you some feedback, and probably, of course, send you a model as well. Okay, so I hope that's all right. And then we're going to have some time on Friday to talk about any issues that you have with it, any problems that you're facing, any questions, just to sort of go through those so that you're ready to write it over the weekend. Of course, if you have any burning issues, you can always just email me beforehand, either using the Teams platform or just straight emailing me, whatever really works best for you, because both you and I are still learning about how to use these platforms. Okay,